The midday sun hung heavy over the dusty main street of Dry Creek, casting long shadows across the cracked boards of the auction platform. Flies buzzed and heat shimmered in the distance, but the townspeople still gathered because gossip was more powerful than the weather out here. They weren't there for cattle or horses today. No, this time it was something stranger. Something, or rather, someone more unpredictable, labeled too wild for any man. The auctioneer declared, voice thick with sarcasm as he nodded toward the shackled girl standing alone on the platform. She's been kicked out of 4 households in 2 years. Talks back, fights harder, don't listen to no one. But if anyone's desperate enough, she's yours for a fair price. Josie Blackthorne didn't flinch. Her chin lifted higher, her fiery auburn hair tangled from wind and trail dust, eyes locked straight ahead like a wolf daring a hunter to fire. She wasn't tall, but she carried herself like she had 10 feet of rage wrapped around her soul. Men muttered among themselves. She set fire to a preacher's barn, knocked her last guardian out cold. I heard she was raised with wolves up in Cherokee Pass. None of it was true, not all of it, anyway, but Josie didn't correct them. Let them think she was dangerous. It gave her power, or at least the illusion of it. Because in truth, she was just 19, orphaned at 12, bounced from hand to cruel hand since, with nothing but her instincts to keep her alive. She expected no bids. Usually, they just carted her off somewhere worse, another judge, another rancher, who wanted free labor and silence. But then a voice came from the back of the crowd, low, rough, steady. I'll take her. Heads turned. A man stepped forward, dusty, tall, and sun-worn. His hat shaded half his face, but Josie caught a glimpse of steel-gray eyes and a thick, calloused hand pulling coins from his SATCHEL. Eli McAllister, a struggling rancher with a profa reputation for keeping to himself and mourning the wife he buried 3 years ago. People said he didn't smile anymore. Said he was drowning in debt and barely keeping his cattle alive. Said he was one storm away from losing it all. Sold for $20, the auctioneer said, almost surprised. To Mr. McAllister. Of Three Pines Ranch. Josie blinked. $20. That was the lowest price anyone had ever paid for her. Lower than a half-broke mare. A guard unshackled her wrists and shoved her toward Eli. She staggered but didn't fall. The townsfolk stepped aside as she passed, whispering like chickens in a coop. Eli didn't speak as she reached him. He just handed her a worn blanket and gestured toward the edge of town. You ride? He asked, voice as dry as the dust around. Them, I ride better than I walk, she shot back, eyeing him sideways. He didn't react. Just nodded toward a lanky Mustang with one crooked ear tied to a post nearby. That one's yours, he said. Name's Buck. He kicks when he don't like you. Fair warning. Josie cracked a grin for the first time in days. Guess we'll get along fine then. They rode out of town with no fanfare, just the creak of leather and the occasional gust of wind. Josie expected the usual threats, the rules, the warnings. But Eli rode in silence, his eyes on the horizon, never glancing at her once. It unsettled her more than shouting ever could. After an hour on the trail, she finally asked, Why'd you buy me? Eli didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. Because I needed help. And you needed out of that town. That was it. No kindness in it. No cruelty either. Just fact. And maybe, for Josie, that was enough for now. As the sky turned the color of rust and blood, they crested a ridge, and Josie got her first look at the ranch. Weather-beaten buildings, sagging fences, a dozen cattle in a pasture that looked more like scorched earth than grassland. It was no grand home. No promise of safety, but for the first time in years, no one had tried to slap her, sell her off again, or break her spirit before sundown. Maybe this place was falling apart. Maybe. The man beside her was hollowed out by loss. And maybe, just maybe, this ranch and this quiet, wounded cowboy would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to her. The moon was already rising when Eli and Josie arrived at Three Pines Ranch. What was once a proud stretch of land now looked like it had been chewed up and spit out by time. The wooden fence posts leaned like drunks after a fight, and the house, if it could be called that, was little more than a cabin weathered to the bone. Josie dismounted without help, her legs stiff from hours in the saddle. The Mustang she'd ridden pawed the ground and tossed its head, but she patted its neck gently. They'd struck a sort of understanding on the ride. Animals didn't lie the way people did. Eli tied up his horse and walked to the front porch, boots crunching dry dirt. He didn't wait to see if Josie followed. Just opened the door and stepped inside. She hesitated for a moment. No shouting, no orders, no cuffs. It was strange, too quiet. She walked in cautiously. Inside, it was sparse and practical. A small table, a wood-burning stove, one chair, a fireplace blackened by years of use. The air smelled of ash, sweat, and loneliness. "There's a cot in the corner," Eli said, pointing to a blanket-covered frame pushed against the wall. "You'll sleep there." Josie glanced around. "You live alone?" "Used to be 3 of us," he replied flatly. "Now it's just me." "And you?" She didn't ask what happened to the other 2. She could guess. "You hungry?" he asked. After a long pause, Josie nodded. "Starving." He scooped beans into a tin bowl from a pot that had been simmering on the stove. "No bread, no meat, just beans." He handed her the bowl without a word and returned to the shadows, leaning against the wall near the window. Josie ate quickly. Hunger did that. When she finished, she held the bowl out. "You always this talkative?" Eli's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Only when I've got something worth saying." That silenced her for now. The next morning, Eli was already outside by the time Josie rolled off the cot. A rooster crowed somewhere behind the barn, and the smell of hay and damp earth filled her nose. She threw on her boots and headed out. Unsure of what was expected of her. She found Eli fixing a fence post that had collapsed sometime in the night. He glanced up as she approached. "You any good with a hammer?" "I'm better with horses," she replied. "Then go check the corral. We've got 3 sick colts. See if any of them's bad enough to call the vet." She blinked. "You're trusting me with your stock?" He looked her square in the eye. "Don't figure you'd have stuck your neck out for that Mustang if you didn't care about animals." Josie didn't answer. Just turned and headed for the corral, heart thudding. The horses were in bad shape. 2 had weak legs, probably from malnutrition. One had a cloudy eye and favored its left side. Josie moved slowly, talking to them, brushing their coats, checking hooves and noses. She didn't notice Eli watching from the barn door. She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment his opinion started to shift. She handled the horses like someone who had grown up among them, patient, firm, and gentle. He had expected fire and rebellion. Instead, he saw instinct and skill. Later that afternoon, she helped feed the cattle and clean the tack shed. No one told her to. She just did it. The ranch was barely standing. Even she could see that. And despite her anger at being sold again, she hated watching things fall apart. As dusk settled in, Eli handed her a tin cup of weak coffee. "You worked hard today," he said quietly. She sipped it. "I'm not afraid of work. I just don't like being treated like a mule." Eli nodded. "You won't be. You do your part, you'll have a place here." Josie looked out toward the far hills. "You still didn't tell me why you bought me," he exhaled. "You looked like you'd already lost everything, so have I figured maybe we'd get along." She turned her head, surprised by the honesty in that. There was no pity in his voice, just tired truth. "Don't expect me to be grateful," she warned. I don't expect anything, he replied. Gratitude's not part of the deal. Work is. They stood in silence as the sun dropped behind the hills, casting the land in golden fire. Josie didn't trust him, not yet, but she didn't fear him either. And that, in her experience, was rare. For the first time in a long while, she felt something settle deep in her chest. Not comfort, not safety, but maybe, just maybe, possibility. The third day at Three Pines Ranch brought Josie face to face with the truth she'd suspected all along. This place was dying. It didn't take a trained ranch hand to see it. The barn roof sagged dangerously at one corner. Half the cattle in the south pasture were thin and slow to rise. The well pump sputtered every morning like it might give up entirely. Even the chickens scratched without enthusiasm, like they knew this land had nothing left to give. Josie leaned on the fence rail, watching a longhorn calf limp after its mother. She didn't speak, just observed, absorbing everything. It was how she'd survived this long. Silence and instinct. Eli approached behind her, his boots crunching softly on dry grass. He carried a feed sack over one shoulder and two more burdens. In his eyes, responsibility and regret. Looks worse than it is, he said without confidence. No, Josie replied, still watching the calf. It looks exactly as bad as it is. He huffed a breath through his nose. We've had a rough season. Josie turned, her eyes sharp. Season? Looks to me like you've had a rough decade. That earned her a glance, but not a rebuke. Instead, Eli dropped the feed near the pen and leaned against the post beside her. I buried my wife 3 years ago, he said quietly. After that, things stopped making sense. I tried keeping it together, but I've been patching holes. Faster than I can fix them. Josie didn't offer sympathy. She didn't know how. But she didn't walk away either. Why don't you sell? Move on. Because this land belonged to my father, and his before him. If I lose it, it's like none of us were ever here. Josie understood that more than she liked. She, too, had once belonged somewhere until she didn't. Holding on to what was left of it, even if it hurt, made more sense than letting it disappear. That afternoon, Josie took it upon herself to check the barn roof. No one told her to. One had to. She found a ladder with 2 broken rungs, dragged it over, and climbed anyway. From the roof, she could see the full stretch of Eli's land and how little of it was still alive. Grass baked to yellow, crooked fence lines, a lone windmill spinning in the dry breeze, but she also saw potential. This place wasn't dead, just forgotten. She pried off the rotten planks and started hammering in new ones, salvaged from an old chicken coop. Her arms ached, her palms blistered. But the work filled her with something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Eli spotted her from the yard and rushed over. What the hell do you think you're doing? He barked up at her. She didn't stop hammering, fixing your roof before it caves in. You'll break your neck. Josie smirked. Only if I fall, and I don't fall easy. Despite himself, Eli stepped back and watched. She was fast, efficient, not reckless like he feared, but skilled. When she climbed down, dusty and sunburnt, he handed her a canteen. Without a word, you always do what needs doing, even if no one asks? He asked. Josie took a long drink. No, only when I care about what happens next. That hit Eli harder than he expected. By nightfall, the ranch hands, few as they were, had noticed. Josie wasn't the wildfire they'd been warned about. She didn't scream or break things. She worked, quietly, harder than most of them. Some gave her nods of respect. One even passed her an extra biscuit at dinner. She didn't trust the kindness. Not yet. But she didn't reject it either. Later, Eli found her brushing Buck, the crooked-eared Mustang, behind the stable. You ever trained horses? He asked. Josie shrugged. They trained me mostly. I got 2 colts in the south paddock nobody can get near, he said. You want a challenge? She smiled, just a little. Always. That night, as Eli watched from the porch while Josie moved like a shadow through the corral, murmuring to the skittish colts, he realized something unsettling. She wasn't just helping. She was fitting in, and for a man who had spent the last 3 years building a wall around his heart and his land, that was both comforting and terrifying. 3. Pines Ranch was sleeping when the wind shifted. Josie was in the loft, curled up under a thin quilt, her body sore but her mind still awake. Something tugged at her chest, some memory, some instinct, something she'd learned the hard way in every home that turned on her. When the air went too still, something bad always followed. Then she smelled it. Smoke. She sat bolt upright. Fire. She whispered. Seconds later, the ranch exploded into chaos. One of the ranch hands, Henry, pounded on doors. Barn's on fire. Get up. Josie grabbed her boots and ran barefoot into the yard. The barn, the old wooden one closest to the house, was already half consumed. Flames licked the roof like greedy fingers. Horses inside screamed. Damn it. Eli shouted, stumbling from the bunkhouse. Get the water barrels. There's animals in there. Josie cried. Josie, don't. Eli started, but she was already gone. She raced toward the barn like the wind itself, ignoring the heat, the warnings, the logic. Inside, the smoke hit her hard, thick, black, choking. But she knew horses. She could hear their terror. Smell it. Through the smoke, she found 2 colts backed into the far corner, eyes wide with panic. One had a bleeding leg, likely from kicking. The stall door. Josie moved low, slow, whispering soothing nonsense. It's all right, babies. I got you. You ain't dying in here. The first colt bolted out once she freed the latch, but the second hesitated, wounded, panicked. With a grunt, Josie wrapped her arm around its neck and forced it forward, coughing hard as sparks rained down around them. The barn's beam groaned above her, then cracked. Eli's shout pierced the smoke. Josie! She burst through the smoke. Cloud seconds before the beam crashed behind her in a burst of fire. The colt limped beside her, singed but alive. Eli caught her at the edge of the barnyard. His hands gripped her shoulders tight. Are you crazy? He shouted. Maybe, she gasped, coughing. But I just saved your damn horses. Their eyes locked. His were wild, not just with fear, but something deeper. Admiration, relief, maybe even guilt. He let go slowly. You didn't have to go in there. Yes, I did, she said. Because no one else would. By dawn, the barn was gone. The fire had taken half the hay supply and most of the tools. But all the horses were alive. And so was Josie. Word spread fast. By mid-morning, every hand on the ranch had a version of the story. Some said she dragged the colt out on her back. Others swore she kicked down the stall door with her bare feet. Whatever. The version, one thing was clear. Josie Blackthorne wasn't just some wild girl anymore. She was something more dangerous. Respected. Later that morning, the sheriff rode out to investigate the fire. Arson was suspected. The cause wasn't lightning. Too dry. Too precise. And not the first fire in the county that month. While Eli dealt with him, Josie sat on the edge of the corral, wrapping a burn on her wrist with a torn strip of her shirt. Henry, the ranch hand who'd warned them all, brought her a canteen. You all right? He asked, squatting beside her. She nodded. Still breathing, he hesitated, then added, You did good. Never seen a girl charge into fire like that. Never. Seen a man do it either, she replied, and Henry laughed. That afternoon, the whispers started. In town, among the ranch hands. Even around the sheriff's fire circle. Maybe she ain't so wild after all. Maybe Eli bought the best thing that ever. happened to this ranch. Eli heard them too. He didn't comment, but Josie noticed the way he looked at her differently. Not like a burden. Not like a problem, but like a partner. At sunset, Eli found her fixing a broken stirrup behind the stable. He crouched beside her. Why'd you do? Did? She didn't look up, because if I didn't, no one would have. They'd have died. No, I mean, why do you care? You were sold here like a stray dog. Most people would have let the place burn. Josie hesitated, fingers tightening on the leather strap. I've been passed around like something worthless for 7 years, Eli, she said. But this place, this broken-down ranch with sick cattle and a roof that leaks, it didn't. Try to change me. You didn't try to break me. She looked up at him then. Her eyes were tired but fierce, so I figured I'd fight for it. Because maybe, just maybe, this place might be the first to fight back for me. Eli didn't say anything, but he reached out and gently wrapped her wrist, tying off the makeshift bandage with hands steadier than hers. And when he left, she felt the weight of his silence settle around her, not cold, not distant, but full of something waiting to become more. It was supposed to be a quiet day. The barn fire had left everyone tired and sore, and the mood around Three Pines Ranch had shifted, less wary, more respectful. Josie had earned her place with blood, smoke, and blistered hands. No one called her wild now. They just called her Josie. She was cleaning tack in the main house when she stumbled across it. The letter. It was tucked between a stack of old receipts and a faded ledger on Eli's desk. She hadn't meant to pry, but the corner of the envelope stuck out just enough to catch her eye. The seal was broken, the ink smudged, but the handwriting was clear from Pennsylvania. She read the first few lines before guilt made her stop. To Mr. Eli McAllister, this is our third request for correspondence. You are unwell. Your land is failing. You are not suited to raise a child under these conditions. It would be best for her sake to place her in a stable home. With family, with us. Josie blinked, staring down at the words. Her? Eli had a daughter? She sat back slowly, the letter trembling in her hand. It all made a strange kind of sense now, the sadness behind his eyes. The way he spoke of his wife like she'd taken something with her when she died. Maybe she had. Maybe it was their child. When Eli returned from riding the property line, he found Josie waiting on the porch, the letter folded neatly in her lap. He froze. Where is she? Josie asked. Your daughter. Eli didn't speak at first. Then he stepped past her, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the far hills. With my sister in Carson's Ridge. Been there almost 2 years. Josie rose slowly. Why? He turned to face her, because I was broken. And I didn't want her to grow up watching me try to stitch myself back together with a bottle and a busted ranch. You're not broken now. That's debatable. They stood in silence for a long moment, wind whispering across the porch boards. Then Eli sat down heavily on the top step. She was born the night her mama died, he said. I held one while losing the other. I thought I'd raise her strong like her mother. But every time I looked in her eyes, I saw what I lost. Josie's voice was quiet. So you gave her away. I didn't give her away, he snapped, then caught himself. I gave her a chance. Josie sat beside him, knees pulled close to her chest. I've been passed off like baggage since I was 12, she said. People said it was for my good. Said I was too much, too wild, too hard to manage. But really, I was just inconvenient. Eli didn't answer. She continued. Maybe you were hurting. Maybe you thought it was right. But if that little girl's anything like you or her mama, she deserved a hell of a lot more than silence. Eli looked away, jaw working. Josie turned to him. Do you miss her? Every single day? Then go get her. He looked at her, startled. She's your blood, your daughter. You want her to grow up thinking she wasn't worth the fight? Eli's voice was low, hoarse. And if I bring her here to this dried-up patch of dust, what kind of life is that? Josie held his gaze. Better than being raised by people who only wanted her because they thought you weren't enough. That hit him hard. He lowered his eyes, nodding slowly. Later that night, Josie walked the corral under the stars. Buck followed her like a shadow. She didn't know much about parenting, only what not to do. But she knew what it felt like to be discarded. And if she could help stop that from happening to someone else, she would. Eli joined her after a while. He didn't speak, just stood beside her, looking out at the land. I'll ride to Carson's Ridge next week, he said finally. Bring her home. Josie nodded. You'll be a better father than you think. He hesitated. You don't know that. I know what it feels like to have no one, she said. And I know what it feels like when someone finally sees. You, he turned toward her, his face half shadowed by moonlight. You saw me too, you know. Josie didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Guess we're both a little less lost than we used to be. The wind carried dust across the yard. At Three Pines Ranch, but the sky above was blue, wide, and clean. Josie was repairing the water trough, sleeves rolled up, arms caked in sweat and mud. She didn't notice the rider approaching until Buck lifted his head and snorted. A man in a fine black coat and polished boots reined in his stallion just outside the fence. His hat was wide-brimmed, the feather in it too clean for cattle work. Everything about him screamed east, money, power, trouble. Josie straightened slowly, squinting toward him as Eli walked out of the barn. McAllister, the man called, tipping his hat. Didn't think I'd find you still clinging to this dust bowl. Eli's jaw clenched. Hayden. Josie tensed at the name. She'd heard it before. Clint Hayden, a land baron. A man who'd been buying up struggling ranches across the county, offering pennies, threatening lawsuits, and sometimes making people disappear. Hayden smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. Still patching fences with borrowed nails? He asked. Heard about your fire. Shame about the barn. But I'm sure that new girl of yours made up for it. Heard she's a real spark plug. Josie crossed her arms. You lost, Hayden? Or just sniffing around for something to steal? Hayden chuckled. I like her, Eli. She's got bite. Then his voice hardened. But you and I need to talk. Alone. Eli stepped forward. Whatever you've got to say it. Hayden reached into his saddlebag and tossed a thick envelope toward him. It hit the ground with a puff of dust. That's your last offer. Sign it, and I'll take this place off your hands before winter eats you alive. Eli didn't move. Hayden's tone shifted. I hand this over to the judge in Red Hollow. He pulled out a second envelope, this one smaller, sealed, and marked with a court insignia. Josie recognized the shape instantly. A juvenile file. Her file. Her blood ran cold. Eli took a step forward. That's not yours to have. Oh, it is, Hayden replied coolly. Pulled some strings back east. Turns out your little ranch. Hand has quite a history. Violence. Destruction of property. Endangerment. Multiple placements. Shall I go on? Josie's fists clenched, heart pounding. Those records were sealed. Hayden shrugged. Unsealed with the right influence. He looked to Eli. You keep her on this ranch, you lose everything, your land, your daughter. The court's not going to hand a child over to a man harboring a delinquent. You think she's changed? She's just waiting to burn you down, too. Silence stretched between them. Then, finally, Eli said, You done? Hayden smirked. For now, I'll be back in 3 days. You can either sign or lose it all. He turned his horse and rode off, leaving a trail of dust and tension behind him. Josie didn't speak for a long time. She stood with her arms locked tight across her chest, eyes burning but dry. She didn't look at Eli. I should go, she muttered. No, he said immediately. She looked at him, wounded. You saw what he had. I don't care. You should. You've got a daughter to think about. He stepped toward her, voice low. That man is trying to scare us with shadows. I don't give a damn about what's in that file. I care about who's standing in front of me right now. Josie's voice cracked. You don't know what I've done. Maybe not, he said, but I know what you've done here. You saved my horses. You've held this place together. You've done more in a few weeks than half my hired hands did in a year. You're not a mistake. Her hands shook. They locked me in a barn. When I was 13, I was too wild to live with other girls. I broke out, set the place on fire when I ran. Eli's jaw tensed, but not in judgment. Did anyone ask why you said it? Josie blinked. Maybe they were afraid of your fire, he said. But I've seen what that fire can do when it's used right. This ranch is still standing because of it. That night, Josie lay awake on the cot. The old file Hayden had waved in the air, haunting her thoughts. Her past had finally caught up. But for the first time in her life, someone hadn't run from it. Eli believed in her. Now the question was, would she fight to stay, or would she run before the courts, the land baron, or the ghosts of her past? Forced her out? Either way, the battle for Three Pines and for the life she never thought she deserved was just beginning. Josie stood at the edge of the corral as dawn crept across the horizon, painting the land in shades of blue and gold. Her fingers gripped the fence rail so tightly her knuckles turned white. The wind tugged at her hair, but her mind was far from the ranch. She'd spent the night battling a storm that had nothing to do with the weather. The file, the threats, Eli's daughter. Hayden's words echoed in her head. You think she's changed? She's just waiting to burn you down, too. Maybe he wasn't wrong. She had run from fire before. Maybe she was the fire. Behind her, Buck whinnied softly, sensing her unease. She turned to the Mustang and brushed his neck. He was the only creature in her life that hadn't asked her to be anything else. She saddled him quietly. No goodbyes, no notes, no second chances. She couldn't let Eli lose his daughter over her. As the sun peeked over the ridgeline, she kicked Buck into a trot, then a gallop. The wind stung her eyes, but she didn't look back. By mid-morning, Eli knew she was gone. Her cot was neatly made. Her boots were missing. The tack shed was open, one saddle gone. Henry came to him with the news, hat in hand and worry written across his face. Boss, she wrote out before sunup. Eli stared out toward the horizon, his jaw set. Which way? North. Looked like she was heading toward Carson's Ridge. His heart sank. Carson's Ridge was where his daughter was. But it didn't make sense. Why would Josie go there? Unless Josie rode hard, the wind biting at her skin. She stopped only once to rest Buck and let him drink from a creek. Her mind spun with memories she didn't ask for, being dragged out of a foster home in the dead of night, being called names, locked in a feed room for refusing to wear a dress. No one had ever come back for her, but maybe she could keep someone else from knowing that kind of pain. When she finally reached Carson's Ridge, her legs ached and her lips were cracked, but her determination held firm. She rode straight to the little white farmhouse on the edge of town. She didn't have to knock. Eli's sister, Miriam, stepped out before she reached the porch, a rifle tucked under one arm and a suspicious look in her eyes. You're Josie, Miriam said, the wild girl Eli bought. Yeah, Josie replied. I'm that girl. Miriam studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. Well, if you came all this way, come meet the reason Eli hasn't slept right in 2 years. Inside, the house was warm and lived in. Quilts on every chair, pies cooling on the counter. And in the corner, a little girl no older than 6 sat with her legs curled beneath her, drawing with a piece of charcoal. She looked up. Big eyes, dark curls, and something so familiar in the way she tilted her head. Josie felt her heart twist. "You're real small for a wildfire," the girl said. Josie blinked. "Excuse me? Aunt Miriam said you were a storm in boots." "But you don't look scary." Josie crouched down. "What's your name?" The girl smiled. "Sadie." Josie swallowed hard. "Hi, Sadie. I'm Josie. I know your dad." Sadie tilted her head. "You the one he keeps dreaming about?" That stopped Josie cold. "He talks in his sleep sometimes," Sadie continued. "He says your name." Miriam stepped closer. "She's not wrong." Josie stood slowly. "He's gonna lose you if I stay. The courts won't let him keep you with me on that ranch." Miriam raised an eyebrow. "Did he say that?" "No." "Then maybe let the man speak for himself." Eli arrived an hour later, breathless, covered in dust, and angrier than Josie had ever seen him, but his voice wasn't raised. It was tight, controlled. "You ran." "I left," she said. "You didn't trust me to fight for you." "I trusted you too much. That's why I left." He stepped closer. "And you thought bringing her back wouldn't matter?" "I didn't know what else to do." Eli looked at his daughter Small, smiling, already reaching for him. His eyes softened, and then he looked back at Josie. "Next time you run, you're taking me with you." She blinked. "What? We're not doing this halfway anymore." "If you're in, Josie, you're all the way in. You, me, Sadie, the ranch, the fight, all of it." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. He reached out. "Come home." Josie nodded. "Okay." She took his hand. For once, she wasn't running away. She was riding back towards something worth staying for. The wind stirred the dirt road as Eli McAllister rode back into Three Pines Ranch with Josie at his side and Sadie sitting snug between them on the saddle. No one spoke at first. Ranch hands stopped what they were doing. Henry lowered his hammer mid-swing. Old Buck let out a greeting whinny. Even the chickens seemed to sense something had changed. Josie slid off the horse first, her boots hitting the dust with quiet certainty. She helped Sadie down gently, brushing straw from the girl's skirt. Eli dismounted and nodded to the hands. "She's home," he said simply. Both of them. It was a strange thing to witness. A girl once called, "too wild for any man," now held a child's hand and stood shoulder to shoulder with a rancher no one thought would open his heart again. But no one questioned it. Not anymore. Josie spent that first evening back helping Sadie settle into the cabin. They shared her cot, giggling as Josie told her exaggerated stories about Buck's crooked ear and the mule who bit every man except her. Eli watched from the porch, a soft smile on his face, as firelight danced across the walls of a house that had known too much silence. But the peace wouldn't last long. At sunrise the next day, Hayden returned. He rode in like he owned the land. Already 2 men trailing behind him, clean-cut and wearing deputy badges from a neighboring county. A show of power, of pressure. Eli was ready. He stood tall outside the barn, his rifle leaned casually against a post. Josie stood beside him, unarmed but fierce as ever. Sadie stayed inside with Miriam, who'd arrived just after sundown and made it clear she'd defend the girl with her life if it came to it. Hayden tipped his hat. "Didn't expect to see her back," he said, nodding toward Josie. "You've got stones, Eli. I'll give you that. You've got nerve bringing armed men to my ranch. Just taking precautions. You know how wild things can turn." Josie stepped forward. "You here to threaten us again or just make a fool of yourself?" Hayden's jaw twitched. "You think a little stunt with a child earns you a pass? Your file is full of enough fire to burn this whole town." Eli stepped between them. "That file means nothing here." "Maybe not," Hayden sneered, "but it will in court. When I tell the judge you've got a violent delinquent raising your daughter on a bankrupt ranch," Eli interrupted. "You'd be lying." Hayden blinked. Excuse me? Eli's voice was iron now. Josie didn't just save my horses. She saved me. And now she's saving this ranch. She's not a liability. She's the reason we're still standing, Hayden scoffed. The court won't care about your little love story. Eli's gaze didn't waver. Then we'll give them something they do care about. He handed a thick envelope to one of Hayden's deputies. Testimonies, affidavits. Every hand on this ranch signed a statement about Josie's work, her character, her courage. That barn fire, she saved lives. That colt limping by the stream, alive because of her. Ask anyone in Dry Creek. The deputy opened it, brows raised. Hayden looked rattled now. You think that'll hold up? Eli took a step closer. You want this land because it borders your new railway route. That's what this is about. But you messed up. You tried to bury a girl who already survived worse. And you threatened a man who had nothing left to lose until she gave him something worth fighting for again. Josie's eyes gleamed with fire as she added, You underestimated me, Hayden, but you won't get the chance to do it again. The deputies exchanged looks. One of them tipped his hat toward Eli. Far as we can tell, Mr. McAllister, everything's in order here. We won't be pressing anything on our end. They turned and rode out. Hayden, red-faced and fuming, spat in the dirt before following them. That night, the ranch gathered around a bonfire in the field where the barn used to stand. The hands passed. Around whiskey. Sadie fell asleep in Josie's lap, curled up like she belonged there. The stars shone brighter than they had in weeks. Eli sat beside Josie, their shoulders touching. You didn't have to stand up for me like that, she said. I didn't, he replied. I stood with you. She looked down at Sadie, then, back at the flames. Think we finally earned our place? Eli smiled. No, I think we built it. The barn rose again, one beam at a time. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy. But something about building it from scratch, with everyone pitching in, made it different from before. This time, it wasn't just wood and nails. It was a symbol, a declaration. Three Pines Ranch wasn't going anywhere. Josie stood barefoot on the unfinished floor, hammer in hand, sweat glistening on her brow. Her hands were blistered, shoulders sore, but her heart, for the first time in years, felt steady. Eli passed her a fresh plank. You ever done this kind of work before? No, she replied, nailing it in place. But I'm learning. Same, he said with a small grin. Turns out building something real takes longer than tearing it down. She looked over at Sadie, who was running circles around Buck with a ribbon tied to a stick. Her laughter filled the yard, joyful, wild, untouched by fear. She's changed things. Josie murmured. So have you, Eli said, quieter now. She didn't reply, not yet. Part of her was still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the judge to reverse course, for Hayden to return, for fate to decide she wasn't allowed to be happy. But days passed. Then weeks. Hayden didn't return. The court sent a notice, custody upheld. The affidavits worked. Josie wasn't a danger. She was proof of change. The town, once wary of her, now nodded hello at the general store. Children waved when she passed. A few ranchers even asked her to look at their sick colts. One offered her a full-time job she politely declined. I've already got one, she said, and meant it. One evening, as golden light soaked the land, Eli rode up beside her while she was gathering eggs. He dismounted and handed her a folded piece of paper. Got a letter from the county judge. Josie's stomach dropped. What now? He shook his head. Not bad. They've cleared your record. She blinked. What? Every mark. Every label. Gone. You're free. Josie held the paper. Like it might vanish. Years of being treated like a thread erased with one quiet letter. What am I supposed to do with this? She whispered. Whatever you want, he said. She looked up at him, eyes full of something fierce and unfamiliar hope. That night, after Sadie had gone to bed and the stars spilled across the sky like silver dust, Josie sat with Eli on the porch. A lantern glowed beside them. Crickets chirped in the tall grass. The air was thick with unspoken things. I've been thinking, Eli said. This ranch, it's better with you on it. She smiled faintly. Well, I'm not planning on leaving, I know. But I mean it more permanent than that. Her heart skipped. He shifted, nervous. This land? These hands, everything I've got is yours, if you want it. Not because you were brought here, but because you belong here. Josie stared at him. You're proposing. I'm offering, he said softly, not just a name, a home, a life. Her breath caught. The wild girl, the broken rancher. And somehow, this impossible moment under the stars. She stood slowly, heart pounding. Then held out her hand. I ain't promising I'll ever be tame, she said. I don't want tame, he replied. I want you. Their hands met, and everything else finally made sense. The morning of the wedding dawned with gold dust in the sky and the sweet scent of fresh hay in the air. There were no church bells, no lace, no preacher in black robes. Just the front porch of a ranch that had nearly fallen to ruin, and the two people who saved it together. Josie stood barefoot, in a simple white blouse tucked into her old work skirt. She'd refused a dress, said she didn't want to marry him in something she couldn't ride a horse in. Her hair was loose and wild, the way he liked it best. A single blue ribbon, Sadie's idea, was tied around her wrist. Eli stood tall beside her, shirt pressed, sleeves rolled. He looked uncomfortable in his clean boots, but not with her. Never with her. Sadie stood between them, holding both their hands, grinning wide enough to stretch the sky. Henry, gruff as ever, served as the officiant. You sure about this, McAllister? He joked. Eli didn't take his eyes off Josie. Never. Been more sure of anything in my life. Josie looked down at Sadie, who nodded solemnly. It's okay, the little girl whispered. You can kiss him now. Everyone laughed. So they did. Afterward, they celebrated under the cottonwood trees. Josie didn't expect gifts, but the ranch hands chipped in for a hand-tooled saddle stamped with her initials. Sadie gave her a crayon drawing labeled My Mom, and it made Josie cry harder than she had in years. The fire pit blazed. Fiddles played. Boots stomped in the dirt. Josie danced with Sadie, then with Eli, then with Buck, who stood there awkwardly while she tied flowers in his crook. Eli watched her with a kind of awe. How this woman, once labeled too wild for any man, had turned a dying ranch into a place full of life. Later, as the sun dipped low and cast the land in copper light, Eli took her hand and led her to the edge of the pasture. I got one more gift, he said. Josie raised an eyebrow. You already gave me a home, a name, a life. He handed her a folded piece of paper. She opened it slowly. It was a deed to the land, north of 3 Pines, 20 acres, fertile, fenced. Her name, her full name, written in ink. Your own piece of this ranch, he said, no matter what happens. You'll never belong to anyone again, except by choice. Josie stared at the paper, hands shaking. I never thought I'd own anything, she whispered. Eli smiled. You don't own this land, you belong to it, same way I belong to you. That night, after the lanterns were out and the fire had died down, Eli and Josie stood under the stars, watching Sadie sleep on a bed of quilts near the fire pit. We built something, didn't we? Josie whispered. We rebuilt it, Eli said. Out of broken pieces. Josie looked down at her calloused hands that had known fire, fists, hunger, chains, and then at the golden ring Eli had slid onto her finger earlier that day. Not Polished, not smooth dot, but hers, just like this land. Just like this life. I was born wild, she said quietly. But I think maybe I was meant for more than just running. Eli slipped his arm around her. You weren't meant to be caged. You were meant to ride beside someone who could keep up. She smiled. Then I'm right where I belong. The wind swept gently through the tall grass of Three Pines Ranch, brushing past a rebuilt barn, a girl who once had no place in the world, a man who once had no reason to live, and a child who had brought them both back to life. They were scarred. They were stubborn. They were stronger than fire, Dot, and now, finally, they were home.